Producers are autotrophs that capture energy from the sun to make organic molecules. There is an exception, though, and the exception are the chemosynthetic bacteria that can make organic molecules from chemicals in hydrothermal vents and don't require the sun's energy to do so. Consumers are heterotrophs and get energy from eating other foods. We can break consumers into more categories as well based on their diets. Herbivores, like grasshoppers, will eat only producers. An omnivore will eat producers and consumers, like a bird that eats seeds and insects. Carnivores eat other consumers, and decomposers will break down all dead organisms from every part of the food chain, which is why it's written on the side of this diagram. Detritivores are a specific type of decomposer, which feeds on detritus, which is fecal matter or decomposing organic matter. Each trophic level on this pyramid indicates the organism's position in a sequence of energy transfers. Producers are at the bottom because they support all the levels above. They get their energy from the sun, and that energy gets transferred to the organisms that consume them. We can follow the energy transfer by looking at a food chain, which is a single pathway of feeding relationships among organisms in an ecosystem that results in energy transfer. Arrows are used to show the direction of energy transfer, so it goes from the food into the mouth of the eater. Food chains are a great way to follow energy transfer, but in reality, a food chain is oversimplified. A food web consists of interrelated food chains, and it's a better representation of reality. You can see all the different organisms in an ecosystem or habitat and how they relate. The amount of energy that gets transferred from one level to the next is surprisingly small. Only about 10% of energy from the previous level is transferred to the next each time. Most of the energy is lost as heat or metabolic and digestive waste as the organism lives its life. Luckily, there are lots and lots of producers at the bottom level to supply the energy needs further up the pyramid. This does mean, however, that as you go up the pyramid, there will be fewer and fewer organisms that can be supported by the level below. That's why there are so few eagles compared to sparrows or grasshoppers in any given ecosystem.
Food chains and food web. In our earlier session, we learned that an organism depends on one another in series for feeding. This series of organisms at various biotic levels form as a food chain. Each level or step of the food chain form as a trophic level. There are 4 trophic levels. The first trophic level is with autotrophs. They are also called as producers and will be available to next level organisms as food. Example, plants. The second trophic level is heterotrophs are also called as consumers. Example, grasshopper. The third trophic level is primary consumers or also called as herbivorous. Example, frog. The fourth trophic level is secondary consumer or also called as carnivorous. Example, snake. The fifth trophic level is tertiary consumer or also called as larger carnivorous. Example, eagle. Thus, interaction among various components of environment involves flow of energy from one component to another. As we learned earlier, the energy from autotrophs is transferred to heterotrophs and to decomposers. Thus, it forms as a food chain. As we learned in our previous chapter, sources of energy, when energy changes from one form to another form, some energy is lost which cannot be used. For example, the green plants on earth capture 1% of energy from sunlight and converts into food energy. When the green plants are eaten by primary consumers, some energy is lost to the environment, some goes into digestion and some in doing work, and the rest goes to reproduction and growth. An average 10% of energy from food will be available for next level of consumers. Therefore, 10% of energy is taken as the average amount of organic matter that reaches the next level of consumers. Since less energy is available for the next level of consumers, food chains generally consist of only 3 or 4 steps. So, little usable energy remains after 4 trophic levels. Generally, Each organism is eaten by two or more other kinds of organisms, which in turn are eaten by several other organisms. Hence, the relationship of food chain are shown as a series of branching lines called a food web. Thus, from the energy flow diagram, we can find the flow of energy is unidirectional. The energy that is captured by the autotrophs does not go back to the solar input, and the energy which passes to the herbivores does not come back to
The Earth is continuously bombarded with energy from the sun and radiates most of that energy as heat back into space, making Earth's biosphere an open system in terms of energy. In contrast, the Earth's biosphere is primarily a closed system in terms of water, minerals, and nutrients. There are finite amounts of these substances which are recycled through the living and geological components of the biosphere called a biogeochemical cycle. Carbon, a key element of organic life on Earth, cycles through the biosphere in this way. A tree, like all plants, algae, and cyanobacteria, is an autotroph, an organism that produces its own food from inorganic molecules to facilitate growth. Through photosynthesis, photosynthetic autotrophs use energy from the sun to combine carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water from the soil to form carbohydrates such as glucose. Oxygen is released as a byproduct of photosynthesis. This is where we will start to track the passage of carbon through the carbon cycle. When sunlight strikes a leaf, the energy in the sunlight is captured and used to convert 6 molecules of carbon dioxide gas from the atmosphere into the 6-carbon sugar, glucose, which can be used as a source of energy for cellular reactions. Glucose can then be stored as starch to be used later for energy, or used to make other molecules, such as cellulose, that form the cell wall of plant cells and contribute to the biomass of the plant. Cellulose is one of the substances aiding in the rigid nature of many plant structures, like the leaves, branches, stems, and trunk. When a log or other portion of a tree is burned, the stored glucose is converted by oxidation back to carbon dioxide gas, which is released into the atmosphere. In a similar way, the burning of fossil fuels, which contain carbon that was sequestered in prehistoric decomposing plant and animal tissues and buried for millions of years, releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Animals are not autotrophs, but heterotrophs. Because heterotrophs depend on the carbon cycle to obtain energy and molecules necessary for growth, they need to consume other organisms. They do this by eating plants, or by eating other animals that eat plants. The glucose a deer acquires from eating plants contains carbon that the plant converted from carbon dioxide gas during photosynthesis. The process of converting glucose to energy, a process called oxidative respiration, uses oxygen to break down glucose molecules in cells, ultimately producing ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the energy of most cellular reactions. Carbon dioxide, generated as a waste product of the metabolic oxidation of glucose, is released into the atmosphere. Through the same process of oxidative respiration, plants also release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This occurs predominantly at night when they are not using carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. In addition to emitting carbon dioxide through oxidative respiration, animals release some carbon as solid waste. These solid waste products are broken down in the soil by decomposers, saprobes, and detritivores. Organisms such as bacteria and fungi that degrade the waste to remove recyclable nutrients that they use for energy and growth. In the process of breaking down animal feces, decaying plants, and dead animals, decomposers also release carbon dioxide gas into the atmosphere. Carbon cycles in a similar way through aquatic ecosystems. Carbon is present in water as dissolved carbon dioxide and bicarbonate ions. Both are sources of carbon for photosynthesis and are taken up by algae and aquatic plants. Carbon dioxide is released into the water through oxidative respiration in these organisms and in other aquatic organisms such as fish, and in decomposition. Carbon dioxide is also exchanged between the water and the atmosphere. The constant absorption of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by photosynthetic organisms and its conversion to carbohydrates by photosynthesis is key to sequestering carbon in the biotic environment. The breakdown of glucose by respiration or burning converts the carbon back to carbon dioxide, releasing it back into the atmosphere. These two processes contribute to the carbon cycle. Because there is a finite amount of carbon in the Earth's biosphere, nutrient cycling such as this is essential to life on Earth. When viewed as a biogeochemical cycle, one can see how the carbon cycle is a balance of carbon stores in the atmosphere, in the bodies of living organisms, and buried in the ground as fossil fuels. Maintaining this cycle in the closed system of the Earth's biosphere allows organisms to live on Earth and participate as key players in the carbon cycle.
Nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is an essential constituent of all major organic compounds present in living organisms, that is, amino acids, proteins, enzymes, nucleotides, and nucleic acids. Different processes that occur during nitrogen cycle are nitrogen fixation, nitrogen assimilation, ammonification, nitrification, and denitrification. Nitrogen is picked up as inorganic compound from the atmosphere and is changed into organic form by plants and some prokaryotes. The atmosphere contains 78% of nitrogen in gaseous state, yet animals cannot use it directly. They can use nitrogen either in inorganic forms as ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates, or in organic form as urea, proteins, and nucleic acids. Nitrogen fixation is the conversion of nitrogen into a compound of nitrogen. Thunderstorm, lightning, and rain helps in transfer of large quantity of nitrogen into soil. Biological nitrogen fixation is carried out by symbiotic bacteria, Rhizobium present in the root nodules of leguminous plant like pea. Cyanobacteria like nostoc and Anabaena present also fix nitrogen. Some free-living bacteria like Clostridium also fix nitrogen in soil. Nitrogen assimilation. Plants take up nitrogen and synthesize compounds from it. Other organisms feed on plants to get nitrogen. Ammonification. It involves the decomposition of proteins of dead plants and animals, and nitrogenous wastes like urea, uric acid, etc. of animals to ammonia in the presence of ammonifying bacteria. Nitrification. It involves the oxidation of ammonia to nitrates through nitrites in the presence of nitrifying bacteria, that is, Nitrococcus, Nitrosomonas, etc. Denitrification. Conversion of nitrate to nitrous oxide and then to molecular nitrogen is carried by denitrifying bacteria, Theobacillus. Thus, there is continuous cycling of nitrogen between the atmosphere and living as well as non-living systems.